And as you heard in that conversation, it's all too easy to forget even the most monstrous history, whether it's chants of Jews will not replace us in Charlottesville or political campaigns in Hungary that include crude anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. It is clear that what's old is new again. Historian Deborah Lipstadt, like Schramm, has devoted her life to contesting evil in all its forms. Born to Jewish immigrants, daughter of a German father, she is perhaps most famous for defeating Holocaust denier David Irving's libel suit in the British High Court. She's a professor at Emory University in Georgia, and her new book is Antisemitism, Here and Now. She tells our Walter Isaacson what we can all do to fight this scourge of hate.
Deborah, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Your book is shaped as a series of letters to two fictional people.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you choose that method?
Well, I was struggling with how to write it, and how to write it in a way that would engage people, and how to write it in a way that would raise concerns without sounding shrill. And I struggled, and then a friend of mine said, why don't you try letters? And the minute she said that, it just clicked. And the letters, the two people I'm writing to, a young Jewish student, whip-smart student who's about to graduate from Emory, and a colleague in the law school, non-Jewish. They became stand-ins for people I've had conversations with. They may be fictional, but everything I say to them and everything they ask of me are conversations and questions and emails that I've had over the past years. What is this? How do we define anti-Semitism? Is it just something, you know, as Potter Stewart said, Justice Potter Stewart from the American Supreme Court said about pornography, I know it when I see it. I can't define it, but can we define it? I think we can define it. And so far it's gotten a very, that format has engaged people a lot.
This new wave of anti-Semitism, is it a wave that you think will recede soon, or are you worried that it'll keep swelling?
You know, I'm a historian. We deal in the past. We eschew predictions. We don't like to predict, because usually if you predict, you're going to be wrong. When I wrote the book, the introduction of the book, I say that this was a very hard book to write. And I didn't know why it was hard. After all, I've been skulking around in the sewers of anti-Semitism and hatred ever since I started working on the Holocaust, and that's been close to 40 years. But then I realized that when I write about that, I'm writing about what was, and now I'm writing about what is. Then I go on to say in the introduction of the book that though it was hard to write, it was even harder to finish. I had my editor had to drag it out of my hands, because every day there was something new. A woman in Paris being thrown out of the window of her apartment because she was Jewish, an event in Hungary, an event in Poland, something in the United States. And then I go on to say, and the book was finished in September, beginning of September, that one thing I'm willing to predict is by the time this book appears, something will have happened to make it outdated. Then
that was Pittsburgh.
Then came Pittsburgh. So I can't predict, but what I see right now with what I call the perfect storm of anti-Semitism doesn't leave me comforted. I'm not a, you know, Chicken Little, dear me, the sky is falling, but I'm worried. I'm worried, and I hope people take action. I think, you know, we maybe can't stop the shooters who, like the Pittsburgh guy in Pittsburgh, or the people who shoot up synagogues or wherever it might be in other places. But we can make it clear that we won't abide this kind of thing. You know, you're at a family celebration, a family dinner, and someone says, look, Uncle XYZ is a racist or an anti-Semite, but don't say anything because we want to keep it friendly. But you have to say something. You have to say something, not because you're going to change Uncle XYZ's opinions, but to telegraph to the other people, especially, but not only the young people at the table, that we don't accept this, that this is not how we speak, and we don't allow this kind of talk, not within our confines where we can control it. I think that is really crucial, and that's what I'm hoping this book will give people the ammunition to do.
What's new about anti-Semitism today?
Well, what's new today is the situation. Today we see it on the right, the political right. We see it on the political left. And we see it amongst Islamists in Europe and in other places as well. So it's sort of a perfect storm in a way that we haven't seen it before.
And what's old about it? I mean, what's
The
how's it the
charges,
same?
the thing about anti-Semitism, it's what we call the oldest hatred, because it goes back thousands of years. The charges remain the same. If you want to identify anti-Semitism, you sort of look for some sort of relationship to money. It always has to do with money. Jews love money. Jews want money, or whatever it might be. Power and nefarious use of that power. So that power to use to enhance themselves, to aggrandize themselves at the expense of others. Irrespective of whether you're looking at the Nazis or the communists or late 19th century anti-Semites, or going way back to the church, et cetera, you find those three themes running through.
Well, you're a historian. Why do those persist?
Why do they persist? That's a hard question. The root is in the story of the death of Jesus in the New Testament. That Jesus, according to the story, the way it's told in the New Testament, wanted to chase the money changers out of the temple, and that the Jews, even though he was a Jew, everybody in the story is Jewish, but it becomes the Jews, got the Romans, the most powerful entity in the world, to crucify him because he was harming them, and they didn't care what goodness he could have brought to the world. And those themes have remained constant. Jews are an anomaly. They should have disappeared a long time ago, not because of but they should have just integrated, assimilated. We're a small number, 12 million people. You ask somebody on the street how many Jews there are, they'll tell you 60, 70 million, or whatever it is. It's 12 million, maybe 13 million Jews. So the fact that we've been around is an anomalous kind of thing, and we don't disappear, and that's sometimes problematic for some people.
Well, let's start by talking about it on the right, because you said it's the right, the left, and the Islamists. On the right, we see it across Europe now.
Right.
All over Europe, it's rising, especially with the nationalists, like in Hungary and other places.
Hungary, Poland, France. Of course, Marine Le Pen was defeated, but her party still exists. And you saw the yellow jackets, the yellow vests. You saw outright expressions of anti-Semitism. So I don't know if they're on the right or the left or what they are, but certainly Viktor Orban, Prime Minister of Hungary, the Polish government. Orban ran a campaign, the last electoral campaign, that was rooted in anti-Semitism, his attacks on George Soros. Now, you can agree with George Soros, disagree with his financial policies, his political inclinations, but the campaign that Orban ran on Soros was clearly anti-Semitic, and it telegraphed to every Hungarian, this is George Soros, the Jew. The Poles, in their Holocaust law, which really calls for a rewriting of history. It says you can't say any Poles collaborated with the Nazis. Well, that's just not true. Look, there were many Polish rescuers. There's no question about it. In Yad Vashem, the greatest number of rescuers from any one country is Poland. Of course, that's where the greatest number of Jews were. But there were many who collaborated. We know that from the memoirs. We know that from German documents, much less from from documents by Jews and memoirs by Jews. So the Poles have said that's not allowed. We see it in Marine Le Pen.
It's not allowed.
You're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to say. You're not allowed to
collaborate.
Right, for collaborating. And originally the law made it a criminal offense, and then they changed it to a civil offense.
Were you upset that Bibi Netanyahu went along with the Poles?
Absolutely. I think it was a big mistake. I think look, Bibi Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, may be doing certain things for realpolitik. Forging closer ties with Hungary, with Orban. Orban was in Israel in the summer, I think it was June or July of 2018, and Netanyahu welcomed him as a great partner in the fight against anti-Semitism. What
did that make you feel?
Made me feel that whatever Netanyahu may be doing for realpolitik, this was a big mistake. And more than, because that's not a trustworthy partner. A trustworthy partner is not someone who engages in this kind of thing. And more importantly, Israel claims to be the official protector of Jews worldwide, that if there's an act of anti-Semitism, Israel's going to speak out and criticize it. And it often has, and it generally does. And this was getting into bed with a very, very dangerous entity in that respect. And when the Poles changed the law from a criminal offense to a civil offense, the law on the Holocaust and teaching about the Holocaust, and Netanyahu embraced it as if there was some great change, and it was really cosmetic. It was absolutely cosmetic. The historians at Yad Vashem decimated this decision. They were highly critical of it. It makes me wonder. It makes me wonder. I mean, I know when you're head of a country, you can't have a, pure look, and you sometimes have to. Politics makes strange bedfellows, but this was too much.
When you see the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe from the populist, nationalist, sort of far fringe right, do you think some of that has been incited by, or at least given a blind eye by President Trump?
Yes, yes, yes. I want to make it very clear. I don't know if Donald Trump is an anti-Semite. I highly doubt it. He has Jewish children. He has Jewish grandchildren, whom he seems to be very proud of. And he has great connections with many Jews. Of course, some of my best friends are Jews is the cover for any anti-Semite, just like some of my best friends are blacks is the cover for a racist. But what he has done is made it comfortable to engage in rhetoric, violent rhetoric that is hateful. When he talked in Charlottesville, there are nice people on both sides. I'm sorry, nice people do not march through a town with their hands outstretched in the Nazi salute saying Jews will not replace us. Nice people don't march with symbols that are swastika-like. He has done this over and over again. His rants about a horde of refugees were being infiltrated, which is what prompted the guy in Pittsburgh to do what he did. All those kind of things raise the level of, or lower the level of discourse and raise the tenor of the attacks on one another. He has not been helpful in this regard. And the critics of this position will come back and say, well, he moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He's been so good to Israel. That's true. That's true. None of it is untrue. But it coexists with this other part. And
do you think anti-Semitism naturally coexists with this sort of nationalism that's been rising all over Europe and the United States?
I think it does. I think it does. It has a long history. I'm not against patriotism. I'm a great patriot. This country has been terrific to my family. My father came here from Germany before the Nazis, but a family was successful, accomplished academically, children, grandchildren, etc. My mother came from Canada, also from a family that had nothing, and they built up a wonderful life, as have so many of my relatives. But nationalism suggests my country right or wrong. My country can do no wrong. My country above all others. Instead of a coexistence, it's a zero-sum game. And history shows us that Jews get ground up in that kind of thing because they're an easy target.
What was your reaction to the Women's March issues?
I was excited by the Women's March. I thought it was a great outpouring, though I was a little disturbed by the leadership. I didn't know as much about them as I know now. And I think these are leaders who, first of all, up until just recently, beginning of 2019, refused to acknowledge that Jewish women could be oppressed by anti-Semitism, could be in danger because of anti-Semitism, refused to include them in the group of vulnerable women. And these were women who kept company with Louis Farrakhan, the leader of the Nation of Islam, who has talked about Hitler as a great man, who has blamed Jews for introducing homosexuality, for oppressing blacks, and who most recently called Jews termites. He said, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm anti-termite. He said it, and then he tweeted it. Now, these leaderships said, well, we need to be educated on this issue. I'm sorry. If you need to be educated, especially as women of color and women who claim to know oppression, that it's not good to call someone termites, then I have no conversation with you. Because what do you do when you have termites? Who do you call? You call the exterminator. See under Nazis. Jews know who you call. So I can't have a conversation. I couldn't march with someone whose political positions I agreed with, but who used the N-word, who talked about blacks in a derogatory fashion, African Americans or anybody from African origin in a derogatory fashion, using what we call the N-word. I couldn't march with them. How can I march with someone who calls me termites? Or how can I expect you know, if you're going to do that, I can't march behind you.
You won a big lawsuit, libel suit, against David Irving, the person who was a Holocaust denier and wrote that the Holocaust didn't exist. And yet, after you won it, you were not in favor of suppressing him or anybody else from saying what they wanted.
Right. He sued me for libel, for calling him a Holocaust denier. I was offered the chance to settle with him. I wouldn't do it. Because I would have had to agree that my books in which I mentioned him briefly, but which I mentioned him would be pulped. And I had to apologize to him and say, you know, and if I said to my lawyer, or to the people who, my lawyer didn't want me to do it, but the people who thought I should do it, I said, what would you like me to settle for? 1 million Jews, 2 million? You can't settle. Certain people you can't settle with. And we won a tremendous victory, showing that he was an anti-Semite, showing that he was a racist, and showing, most importantly, that he lied outright when he said, I have a document which shows X, Y, and Z. It showed not even A, B, and C, 1, 2, and 3. It was just not at all correct.
But you have been a supporter of allowing free speech, even for people who are anti-Semitic. Why is
Well,
that?
first of all, I believe in the First Amendment. And I think the First Amendment is very important. And if you start having people picking and choosing what can be said and what can't be said, I don't want to put in the hands of politicians the power of deciding what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And I think that also thinking strategically and not legally or morally, that when you forbid something, you turn it into forbidden fruit. You make it more appealing. I want to find out about this. Why are they making it forbidden? Why are they not allowing me to read this or see this? So I think both from a moral point of view and from a strategic point of view, I'm not against it. Now that's very different. I don't want these rights to be curtailed. I don't think laws against Holocaust denial work. Having said that, I understand why a Germany might have them, why an Austria might have them, why Poland might have them. It's a different story. And, you know, what do they say? Foolish inconsistencies are the hobgoblins of small minds. So I'm not going to be foolish consistencies. I'm not going to be, I'm willing to be inconsistent. But ultimately, I don't want politicians deciding what can and cannot be said. I think it's a dangerous situation.
Deborah, thank you so much.
Thank
for
you,
being with
Walter.
us.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.